It's college football rivalry week, and two of the greatest sports rivals, the University of Michigan and The Ohio State University, are facing off. The game, as it's referred to by fans, was the most watched non-NFL sports event in the U.S. last year, bringing in 19.1 million viewers. Here are three things to know about the storied rivalry. 1. The states of Michigan and Ohio have long had a beef. The border between the two states was long contested, a land dispute going all the way back to the early 1800s that sparked an actual military standoff called the Toledo War.
It was over a strip of land of roughly 468 square miles. The line was supposed to run from the southernmost tip of Lake Michigan to Lake Erie, which would place a pretty important port in the territory of Michigan, which came to be Toledo.
When the Erie Canal opened in 1825, that area was open to trade from the Atlantic.
So now Toledo and the Miami River around it became this hugely valuable, or at least potentially valuable area for both Michigan and Ohio.
And this led to a common misconception about the start of the Michigan-Ohio State rivalry. At that time, the University of Michigan owned 915 acres in downtown Toledo, and some people believe that's where the University of Michigan was supposed to be built.
There's actually, a historical marker in Toledo that claims to be the case, but there's absolutely no evidence whatsoever that the University of Michigan ever even considered building a campus in Toledo.
The university struggled to sell the land during the Toledo War since buyers questioned if it was actually theirs to sell. Tensions over the disputed land set up an armed conflict between the two states. Not wanting states to go to war with each other, the U.S. Congress passed the Northern Boundary Act in 1836, which gave Michigan, the state, what we now know as the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and $400,000 in exchange for those 468 square miles of disputed land. With the University of Michigan-owned land in Toledo, now valuable but technically in Ohio, Congress had to pass a second act in 1837 clarifying that they had the right to sell the land despite it not being in Michigan territory anymore. The university sold it off in subsequent years to financially support the university.
The view of it was entirely for revenue generating purposes because they had a lot of debts, they didn't have many students.
Which brings us to number 2. The Michigan and Ohio State football teams had their first face-off in 1897, but the modern-day sports rivalry probably didn't start until decades later.
In 1935, when the game was moved to the end of the season where it's been every year, everything became a build-up to is all these other conversations about this great legendary rivalry. It's feed into it all these other pieces of lore and history from our states that probably very few people in 1897 thought about at all.
There's also a lot of good-natured stories about how amicable the rivalry was. So it didn't get to be intense or heat up until arguably the 1950s and 1960s onward.
And 3, Michigan being known as the Wolverine state, and by extension, why the University of Michigan's mascot is the Wolverines, can be traced back to the Toledo War.
The Ohioans, during this time leading up to the 1830s, saw the Michigan authorities and the people along the northern boundary as like Wolverines, and that they were vicious and would stay after you. If you did something, that was untoward toward them.
Michiganders say, no, we adopted that claim because Michigan's Wolverines are strong, they're tenacious, they'll defend what's theirs no matter what. So both sides claim to have originated the nickname for very different reasons.
It's great to be a Michigan Wolverine!
But what is undeniable is that it was adopted very early as a badge of pride by Michiganders. We have evidence here at the Bentley Historical Library that University of Michigan students and alumni were already referring to themselves as the Wolverines by 1861.
For PBS News, I'm Cecilia Lallmann.